The Grand Egyptian Museum's full opening is finally scheduled for November 1st, 2025. But let's talk about if the gem is actually going to open that date, or like every other time Egypt has announced the museum's opening, if they're going to postpone it again. I'll also talk about where King Tut's mask is at the moment, if they're going to close down the gem before the grand opening like they announced they would do over the summer, and when you can know whether or not the King Tut artifacts have fully moved over to their home at the gem, or if they're still on display at the Old Egyptian Museum. If you don't know me already, my name is Gus, and I started Egypt Adventures Travel because I love Egypt and I want to help people have amazing trips there. I lead several group tours to Egypt per year. I recently launched a group tour to Jordan, and I also help plan private tours and join as a private guide. You can go to my website, egyptadventurestravel.com, to learn about upcoming group tours or just to read lots of information about travel to Egypt. Now let's jump in and talk about the Grand Egyptian Museum's full opening on November 1st. If you don't know this already, Egypt has built a brand new museum way out by the Giza pyramids next to the Sphinx, far away from the old original Egyptian Museum in downtown Cairo. The Grand Egyptian Museum, as it's called, is going to be the largest archaeological museum in the world when it finally fully opens. And the museum right now is already about 60% open. So the majority of things on display at the museum are already open to the public and have been open for over a year. But what we're waiting on with this gigantic new museum is the final opening of two big galleries. The first gallery is going to house the over 5,000 artifacts that were found in the pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb back over 100 years ago, including his golden sarcophagus, the throne, and the King Tut death mask, the #1 most important artifact from ancient Egypt. In addition to that gallery, there's going to be a gigantic museum that's going to house the gargantuan solar boat that was unearthed next to the Great Pyramid. So the Khufu Solar Boat Museum, in addition to the Tutankhamun Galleries, are the two remaining areas of the Grand Egyptian Museum that have yet to open. And that's what everybody's waiting to happen, to see the full opening of the full museum with those last two remaining galleries finally opening their doors to the public. If you've been following the saga of this museum's opening, though, you've noticed that there have been delays time and time again, and every single time there's been a new announcement about when an opening will happen, it never seems to come to fruition. Even just this last May, a few months ago, the Egyptian government announced that they would close down the Grand Egyptian Museum for a couple of weeks in June through early July, and that they would open the museum fully on July 6th. But then they walked those statements back in June and they decided to cancel that grand opening. They said that the situation happening between Iran and Israel was the reason why they delayed the opening of the museum. But there's been so many different excuses, like construction, the new metro line, the bridge they're building between the Giza pyramids and the new museum, the escalation in Gaza and Israel, and tons of other things that have delayed this museum's opening time and time again. So who really knows what's going on with the Grand Egyptian Museum and with the full opening? But the latest that we heard is earlier in August, the Egyptian government announced that they're going to be doing the full opening now on November 1st, 2025. Like the several other times that the government has announced official opening dates of the gem, who knows if this is actually going to come to fruition. So what I'm telling all of my clients who are planning travel to Egypt, where the gem's full opening is contingent for their trip to be a success, to hold off on planning any travel until after the museum is confirmed to have been open. It's happened so many times over the last several years that I've planned trips for people and they have been banking on the gem's full opening. We have a date set that the gem is going to open. The government announces it'll open in a specific period, and then somebody plans a trip, but then the museum doesn't actually open, and then that person's really disappointed that they planned their trip around the museum opening that never ended up happening. So my advice to anybody who wants to go to Egypt only after the gem is fully open, to wait until after November 1st. We'll see if that gem actually opens up. I will be there in person on November 1st to film and to make a YouTube video and to show you the inside of the museum, to show you the King Tut Gallery, show you the Solar Boat Museum and all the other areas of the museum that have already been open. And that's when you should start planning a trip to Egypt once we know 100% with certainty that the gem has already opened. But for travelers who don't mind visiting Egypt during the hubbub of the gem's potential full opening, and who don't mind the possibility that the gem might actually not fully open on November 1st, go ahead and start planning travel now, knowing that you'll still experience amazing things in Egypt. Abu Simbel Temple, the Valley of the Kings, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, doing a Dahabeya Nile cruise, going up to Alexandria, going out to Siwa Oasis. There are so many hundreds of sites to visit in Egypt and just dozens of places that will take your breath away. So any trip to Egypt, whether the gem has those last 2 galleries open or not, is going to be an amazing trip. So for folks where they don't mind if the gem might be open or might not be open, making a trip now and planning to go in November is a good idea. And who knows, the gem might actually finally have its full opening on November 1st, and you might be able to see all of the King Tut treasures in one spot and Khufu's Solar Boat Museum. The question that everybody asks when talking about the Grand Egyptian Museum's full opening is, where is King Tut's mask and when will the mask be moved over to its new home at the gem? So let's talk about that. King Tut's funerary mask is the most important artifact from all of ancient Egypt. It has wowed thousands of people over the last 100 years since Howard Carter discovered King Tut's tomb, and for the last several decades, it's been on display at the Old Egyptian Museum, which is in Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo. At the making of this video, King Tut's mask is still on display at the Old Museum. You can visit that museum today, tomorrow, and the mask will still be there for you to see. However, those 5,000 plus artifacts from the Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb will be at the Grand Egyptian Museum for the full opening. So at some point, Egypt is going to take that mask and they're going to move it from the Old Museum over to the Grand Egyptian Museum. The problem is, we don't know when that's going to be. Earlier in May, when Egypt announced the gem would open up on July 6th, we speculated that that mask would get moved in mid to late June. But now that the opening has been announced to be November 1st, if it actually happens, that means the mask will most likely move sometime in mid to late October. So staying tuned on any updates for the gem, subscribing to my YouTube channel, getting on my email newsletter, which you can find on my homepage, EgyptAdventuresTravel.com at the bottom, will get you any updates about the location of King Tut's mask, because I promise I will update everyone as soon as we have any news regarding the mask's location and when it will move. But as of now, we're not sure when that will happen. Right now, it's on display at the Old Egyptian Museum in its original home. But pretty soon, probably in mid-October or late October, it will get pulled off display and it will move over to the Grand Egyptian Museum. We're all hoping, fingers crossed, that it won't get pulled off display for a long period of time, so that folks that still have trips happening this fall can either see the mask at its original home or at the Grand Egyptian Museum. For folks who are visiting Egypt before the grand opening of those last 2 galleries of the gem, visiting the Grand Egyptian Museum is still a great idea. It is a world-class museum that has thousands of ancient artifacts spanning all the way from the pre-dynastic period before the ancient Egyptian pharaohs through the Greek and Roman times. Think about people like Alexander the Great or Cleopatra. Those thousands of artifacts are well laid out and displayed with lots of placards explaining what each piece is. There are 12 main galleries that are thematically and chronologically laid out. So going to this gigantic museum is still a great idea, even for folks who are visiting Egypt before the King Tut and Solar Boat Museum fully open. If you're deciding to visit the Grand Egyptian Museum, you can go to their website. It's visit-gem.com. It's linked in the blog post that I put in the video description. And you can read all about the Grand Egyptian Museum's opening hours, ticket prices, and you can even book tickets online in advance. Or you can decide to buy tickets in person at the Grand Egyptian Museum. If travelers still have time to just visit one museum, they always say, Gus, there are 3 big museums in Cairo dedicated to ancient Egypt. the Old Egyptian Museum, the Grand Egyptian Museum, and the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. If I only have 1 or 2 days in Cairo, which museum should I focus on? And my answer to that question, just like it's been in previous videos, is if you want to see that golden King Tut mask, going to the Old Egyptian Museum, the original Egyptian museum in Tahrir Square, is still going to give you the most bang for your buck, because you're going to see that death mask of King Tut, the most important artifact to see from all of ancient Egypt. You're also going to see lots of other amazing masterwork pieces of Egyptian statuary. You'll see the Narmer palette, our first ever depiction of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. So the Old Museum at this point, I think, is still the #1 museum to go to in Cairo. However, if what you really want to see is not necessarily the King Tut mask, but you just want to see a lot of artifacts, statues, colossal statues from ancient Egypt, and you want to be able to do a more self-guided tour at your own pace and to be able to read descriptions for the objects that you're seeing and know what you're looking at, then the Grand Egyptian Museum is my #1 choice. The gems galleries are wonderfully laid out, everything is labeled and explained, and you can really do it on your own. You don't need to do a group tour or a private tour of the gem. You can really do a self-guided trek through the main galleries, the grand staircase, and the Great Hall, and have a really good experience. Now, the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization is the 3rd museum in Cairo that I recommend to go to, only if you have more than 2 or 3 days in Egypt's capital. The National Museum of Egyptian Civilizations highlight our 22 royal mummies from the New Kingdom period of Egypt's history. They have mummified remains of pharaohs like Ramses the Great and Queen Hatshepsut. These are amazing mummified remains to see, but that's really all the museum has to offer that makes it stand out against the Old Museum or the Grand Egyptian Museum. So I'm recommending the NIMC, or the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, for those folks who have to see those mummies of those pharaohs, or for people who already have more time in Cairo and are going to see the gem or the Old Museum before seeing the NIMC. The last topic I want to talk about is the gem's potential closure. We heard back in May that the gem would close from the middle of June until its full opening in July, which didn't end up happening. And then the museum didn't end up closing since they postponed that full opening. So it's my guess that the Grand Egyptian Museum might announce a closure sometime in this fall, probably late October, before the grand opening of those last 2 galleries on November 1st. But they might not. They might decide that since it's going to be high season in Egypt, starting in October, tourists arrive to Egypt in droves to sightsee. So they might decide to try to open everything up without taking the museum off as an option for people to visit, but who knows? We're gonna have to wait and stay tuned for any updates regarding the gem's potential closure in advance of the grand opening. And if you're staying subscribed to my YouTube channel and if you're on my email newsletter, I'll be sending out any updates as soon as I have them about any closures or opening updates for the Grand Egyptian Museum. So we went over the Grand Egyptian Museum's new opening date of November 1st. We talked about, will that actually happen? Who knows at this point, because every other time we've made any predictions about the gem, it's always been wrong, but we'll all hope that it'll open fully on November 1st. We talked about where King Tut's mask is, when that mask will move, and what's going to happen with how that looks and how we're going to learn more information about when King Tut's mask will move from the Old Museum to the gem. And we talked about, of the 3 museums in Cairo dedicated to ancient Egypt, which one is the most important one to visit. So leave a comment and let me know, what additional questions do you have about the Grand Egyptian Museum? What are your thoughts? Are you frustrated that the museum has taken so long to open? Are you excited for the full opening? Will you be to Egypt during the full opening, or are you going to plan a trip after the museum's already confirmed to have opened? I love reading every single comment from my reviewers, replying to questions, and also adding in my 2 cents. Thanks for watching this update about Egypt's newest museum. I'm so excited for the potential full opening, but like always, I'm remaining realistic and knowing that since it's been canceled and postponed every other time, it might not happen according to schedule. Either way, I will be at the Grand Egyptian Museum in early November, so you can expect an update from me then. Until then, everybody, I'm Gus with Egypt Adventures Travel, and I appreciate you watching my videos.